Great. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's grant solicitation webinar, OJJDP FY 2019 Second Chance Act Addressing the Needs of Incarcerated Parents and Their Minor Children, New Applicant. My name is William Moore, and I am with the National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be published on NTTAC's YouTube page. The webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the event transcript and supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat pod. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. During today's webinar, presenters will address questions during our Q&A segment of the webinar. Please type in your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything at this time. And I'll give folks just a couple of seconds here. Please type in the total of additional people in the room with you today. Again, if you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. Oh, excuse me, apologies. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you all will be provided with a link to a brief evaluation about today's presentation, and the feedback you provide will be used to assist in future planning and training. And following today's webinar, attendees will receive a certificate of attendance. The certificate is sent out approximately an hour following the conclusion of today's web event via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for the certificate, and please note that only participants that are registered and signed in will receive a certificate of attendance. I will now turn over today's webinar to our moderator and presenter, Kathy Mitchell. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the webinar. We will be discussing the solicitation that was recently posted. We call it COIP for short, but the actual title is the OJJDP FY 2019 Second Chance Act Addressing the Needs of Incarcerated Parents and Their Minor Children. So today we'll go over just a general overview of the program. We'll talk a little bit about the goals and objectives, and then we'll talk about the application process. And here's a link to the solicitation. We'll be referring to it throughout today's presentation. So if you'd like to pull it up now and follow along as we refer to certain parts within this document, you can do so by clicking on this link. And the applications are due on April 15th. So just a brief overview. This is a 3-year grant program. It promotes and expands services in detention and correctional facilities to incarcerated individuals and their minor children younger than 18. It also provides services to children who have incarcerated parents by facilitating access to services that support their needs. It also provides states and localities with the funding they need to implement positive family engagement strategies and activities that address the needs of incarcerated parents and their children. Some of the activities include developing strategies to increase and enhance communication between the parent and child, providing transitional reentry services that incorporate a focus on parental responsibility. And lastly, supporting the delivery of community-based services to meet the needs of kids with their parents. So the target population for this initiative is going to be incarcerated parents and their minor children younger than age 18. So OJJDP will give priority consideration to applicants that have the policies, practices, and/or procedures in place that ensure the best interests of the child. Also, applicants should describe in their applications the policies, practices, and procedures that will be used to facilitate and manage this parental relationship. And there's also a lot of flexibility and leverage for guardianship and support parents, in addition to court-appointed special advocates. Applicants should also describe how the program will determine criteria for participation and conduct periodic reviews of the child's desire to maintain contact with the incarcerated parent and any court orders that may prohibit contact. So you'll notice for those of you who are familiar with this program, it's been around some time. It's kind of changed its focus within the last few years. In 2018, it was the Second Chance Act addressing the needs of incarcerated parents with minor children. And you'll notice that the FY19 solicitation says addressing the needs of incarcerated parents and their minor children. And so the difference in the title is intentional. We wanted to make sure that children are being served and that they are being elevated, that their care is being elevated, and that projects are being responsive to their needs. And so as you continue to work on your applications, you want to make sure that you capture that distinction and that there is a clear benefit to the youth. So goals and objectives. So the goal of this program is to assist states and localities in developing and expanding services that meet the needs of kids who have parents that are incarcerated. The programs that you propose in your applications should aim to prevent violent crime, reduce recidivism, and ultimately protect the safety of law enforcement, correctional officers within your particular state. And we want to see applications that talk about engaging incarcerated parents and their children, and support the delivery of transitional reentry services, including services to minor children upon release, in order to reduce recidivism and prevent violent crime. Successful applicants will address the needs of incarcerated parents and their children to include reentry and transitional services for incarcerated parents that focus on incorporating parental responsibility. So examples of activities are listed on page 7 of the solicitation. Is a broad range of activities that are allowed under this particular announcement. We want applications to talk about how they might consider partnering with youth service organizations to accomplish their goals and objectives. Performance measures for this solicitation are located in Appendix A at the very bottom of the document on page 36. So performance measures, those of you who've applied for federal funding before are probably quite familiar with this aspect of the application process. And certainly those who've been awarded federal funds before are familiar with this data requirement that we have. And so the goals and objectives and deliverables are directly related to the performance measures that are listed in the solicitation. They help demonstrate the quality of your work, the results of your work, the impact of your work, and they show the outcome of what you're trying to achieve. Applicants are not required to submit this information at the time of the application, but they will be required to submit performance measure data every quarter should you become awarded. So you can visit our performance measurement page is at ojp.gov/performance. That will give you an overview of performance measurement activity. The goals that are connected to the performance measures should be measurable, they should be achievable, and they should be written in declarative statements that are short and concise. So eligibility. Eligible applicants are limited to states, including territories and units of local government. OJJDP welcomes applications that involve 2 or more entities. If you would like to partner with someone and submit a joint application. However, there should be just 1 lead applicant, and the other entity that you partner with would be considered a subrecipient, for example. The applicant must be the entity with primary responsibility. So the lead applicant should be the leader on the application, and then you may have an organizational unit that you're partnering with. Under the solicitation, only 1 application by any particular applicant entity will be considered. However, you can, as I just mentioned, be a subrecipient. And subrecipients obviously can be utilized in more than 1 project. So let's hop over to the solicitation. So you won't actually see the solicitation on your screen, but if you were able to click on that link that I showed earlier, you can open it up on your computer, and we'll go down to section D, titled What an Application Should Include. So if you don't have that solicitation open, don't worry about it. I'll kind of read verbatim. So you don't have to necessarily have it in front of you. So I am on page 13 of the solicitation. I'm just going to go briefly through some of the more critical elements that you'll want to have on hand. So first you have the SF-424. This document is usually generated through grants.gov, and it's like the face sheet of your application. It has all of the basic particulars, name, address, what you're applying for. And then you want to have your abstract. Abstracts should be 400 words or less. And I can't stress enough that they should be written for a general public audience, which means anyone who is not involved in this work, who is not in this field, the average person walking down the street should be able to read your application and comprehend what you're trying to convey. So it should be written for the general public, and then it should be single-spaced, 12-point font. So it has a lot of particulars that you'll want to be mindful of, listed here on page, actually I'm on page 14 now. So the program narrative. So the program narrative is going to be a more full-out version from the abstract, and it's going to talk about what you plan to do, how you plan to respond to the goals of the solicitation. This is where you'll list your goals, your objectives, your strategies, and talk about your project design. So here's a note on performance measures and project evaluation. You don't have to include the logic model, but it's helpful to have because should you become an award recipient, more than likely we'll reach out to you to ask you at some point during the planning process for the logic model for the timeline. So these are not mandatory requirements, but it's something that you want to begin to think about. Letters of support are always welcome, especially during the peer review process. They strengthen the project, and so as much as you can, try to get in some letters of support and some memorandums of understanding to accompany your application. And of course, the budget. So you definitely, and this is for those individuals who are familiar with OJJDP funding, you definitely want to refer back to the link for the budget that's specifically in this program announcement. This link changes, sometimes the worksheet changes, sometimes the language regarding how budgets should be submitted changes. And so if you are used to working on a previous link with a previous solicitation, or maybe even the same solicitation but a previous funding year, you always want to ensure that you go back to the current year's solicitation and click on that link and then develop your budget from there. And so you'll have the actual budget, and then you'll have a budget worksheet. You want to make sure that your budget worksheet is your budget narrative is very detailed in that it explains each cost category in detail. So that's the budget and the budget narrative. And then you can talk about any proposed subawards or any proposed procurement contracts within the application. But again, should you become awarded, there'll be a lot of time after the award is made to talk about your subawards, to talk about how you plan to procure services to fulfill the goals and objectives of your project. And so that's about it for what the application process will include. Those are some of the main particulars. And so we'll move on to, of course, file names. So file names are so important. And so there's information in the program solicitation that talks about file names. I won't go over this in detail, but just be very mindful that they should just make sense. So if I pull up the application, I should be able to go straight to a document that says program narrative. I should be able to go straight to a document that says budget detail worksheet. I don't always know the name of your project. So your project may be Children of Incarcerated Parents of Detroit, and it may have an acronym. So your file name may be the acronym of your project. That's foreign territory to me. All I know is budget detail worksheet, program narrative, program abstract, resumes, subawards, like basic standard federal government names are always best. If you want to include a name or an acronym that is particular and unique to your specific locality, you may certainly do so, but just ensure that the basics are there, like in bold lettering or just clear, so that I don't have to sift through or try to figure out what you meant. And definitely for the reviewers, these reviewers, they have a huge time commitment. Oftentimes, they have a short amount of time to go through potentially 10 applications. Each application could be 30 to 40 pages in length. And so you just want to make it as easy for them as possible. So the file names, program narrative, done. Budget detail worksheet, done. And keep the file names as short as you possibly can. So logic model. So you can submit the logic model, as I mentioned earlier. If you are offered the award, we will collect that from you at that time. So it's not necessary that you include it with your application, but given that this is a competitive announcement, it would be helpful to have. It just helps the reviewer really ascertain what you're trying to do. And if you get a reviewer, for instance, that is a stickler for logic models, you'll just be kind of glad that you included it. So not having it certainly will not remove you from the competition. And so if you need some information on how to develop a good logic model, so you in your unique state and locality might have your own ideas, but following this link will give you some good ideas of what OJJDP considers to be a good, effective logic model. And you have the link there on your screen. And so here's some additional information. You can go to ojjdp.gov. This link will take you to the solicitation. It'll take you to the frequently asked questions site and just some additional information that may be useful to you as you put together your application. So here are some additional funding details and related documents. You can follow either of these links for more information. And that concludes our presentation today. It was just a brief overview just to go over some goals and objectives and talk about the application. And if you have any questions at this time, you can type them in the chat box.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. So as a reminder to folks, please feel free to type in your questions into the chat box. We have a few coming in, Kathy, so I'll give you some time to go ahead and review a few of those questions, and you can go ahead and answer them whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I have a question. Under services, would that include services reported only if those were directly funded by the grant? If the jail provides if I can expand this window. I did this before. If the jail provides, oh, the question disappeared. Oh, William, the question, let's see.
Oh, sorry, Kathy, may I have to just scroll up a little bit because we do have, we had a number of questions kind of coming in rapid fire here, so you may see it scrolling up as we're pasting in the questions there for you. My apologies.
So
let me.
Very top and it's gone.
Okay. I'll go ahead and I'll repost that for you there.
First one that Alyssa typed in.
Okay.
Am I in the right box with his audience Q&A?
Yes, that's correct box. Yes, it is.
So I'll go on to the next. There was a question that Alyssa typed in. I think the question was asking about can you include services that the grant does not support or something like that. It was a question that Alyssa typed in the box. I don't know what happened to it, but I'll try to answer the question the best way that I can from memory. But your performance measures are going to tie in directly to the goals of the solicitation, which tie into the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, which ties into the data that we report to Congress. And so if you are providing services for a demographic that falls outside of the goals of the solicitation, you can certainly talk about it, you can report it, you can include it in your progress report, but we're only looking for the specific demographic that's unique to the solicitation, and that is what's going to count for your outcomes, if that makes sense. So if you're providing services to a parent who's not incarcerated, that we can't really capture that data in a meaningful way. So the next question, will we have access to the list of people on this call? Okay, I guess some of us will be looking for partners. I will throw that back over to William.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, we'll have to maybe talk a bit offline just in regards to some privacy. But we will maybe have a discussion and then we can be back in contact with the participant that asked that particular question.
Okay, thanks, William. Does an application have an advantage if it partners with an entity? I think it's all about capacity. Whatever if you have the capacity to perform and you think it's strengthened by partnering with someone, I think it's going to be subjective. It's up to you. I've seen a lot of grant applications that were very successful that had no partnerships, and I've seen some that were very successful that had a lot of partnerships. So the more partnerships you have, the more work you have to do because the partnerships will have to be substantiated. You'll have to have monitoring plans for them. And so you'll want to make sure that if you do intend to partner, that it's a really cohesive partnership that's really going to add value to your program. Can you provide examples of budget items? Can funds be used for direct services? Funds can be used for direct services. Examples of budget items, do you mean budget category? So you want to have some funds set aside for travel, just in case there's any particular OJJDP sponsored training coming up. There might be a financial management training requirement, so we'll want to see budgets that have funds set aside for that. If you do partner, if you do have a subaward, then you'll want to have funds set aside for procurement services. You may want to have funds set aside for personnel. If you have in-house personnel that will be dedicating a percentage of their time to this grant. And then just general office supplies. There's a supply category. Some of you may have an indirect cost category. So if you go to the budget link that is listed in the solicitation, it'll take you to a sample budget worksheet where you have all of the categories laid out in front of you. And if you Google the DOJ Financial Guide, the financial guide will talk about the budget and it'll explain in great detail each category that you want to keep in mind. Does an application have, okay, so I answered that one. Are sanctuary cities eligible to apply for these funds? That's an excellent question. So the solicitation doesn't directly talk about sanctuary cities. We will just refer you back to the eligibility guidelines. And so if you meet the eligibility that's listed on the first couple of pages of the solicitation, then you are officially eligible to apply. And so are federally recognized tribes eligible for this grant? So if you go back to the eligibility that's listed on the first part of the solicitation and you meet those requirements, then you are officially eligible to apply. I don't want to speak too soon, but I do not believe that tribes are eligible to apply, but you do want to go back to the eligibility section and read that specifically, and if you fall under that eligibility, then you are eligible to apply. Is there a percentage required for evaluation? No, there's not. The proposed award amounts of $500,000 to $750,000, are they to be spread over the 36-month period? Yes, that should be spread over the 36-month period. It's not per year. Can small amount of funds be used to remodel visitation spaces to more family-friendly? That's an excellent question. I would have to look at your application to see exactly what you're proposing to do. In some cases, you know, as long as it doesn't involve major construction, if you just kind of want to beautify the space and add some critical elements to it, usually in most cases that is allowable. So in terms of I'll just say one thing about the space, that whether you want to set aside funds in your budget for space allocation, to remodel, or what have you, if that's the vision you have for your program, go ahead and write it into your application. Go ahead and put it in your budget. So what's going to happen is if you're awarded, there'll be another time for negotiation. And so if, as an awardee, there's something in the application that is unallowable, you can still get the grant. You just may have to make a revision in your budget. And so don't think that don't be squeamish about it. If you want to put in funds to develop or remodel a visitation space, then go ahead and put it in there. The budget form that you link from the solicitation is different from the ones available on the grants.gov application page. Should we plan on completing and submitting both versions? I would do the one from the OJJDP. I would do the one from the solicitation. If you want to do both versions, you can do both versions. I strongly suggest that you do the one that's in the program solicitation. My organization may subgrant the funds if received. Upon submission of our application, we will not be able to name the subgrants then. Will this put our application at a disadvantage? Nope, not at all. Not at all. You can certainly make note of that you intend to subgrant, but you just don't have those pieces together. That's perfectly fine. Performance measurements table. Our project does not track the long-term behavioral changes of children of incarcerated parents. If our project does not track the changes in behavior, will the project be scored lower, or is this a mandatory requirement for this notice of funding? I do not. So it's hard for me to say. So our review process, as you guys know, is independent and competitive, and we have nothing to do with. So I don't know how a reviewer might consider that. I don't make the funding. I don't review the applications for funding. I help make the recommendations that the reviewers put forth, but those determinations are just in the hands of the reviewer, so I don't know how a reviewer would score that. I personally, so I certainly can't speak yes or no, but what I can say is that I don't think that that would hurt the application. So I can only speak for the applications that I reviewed for other programs and other government agencies years ago. I just want to see an application first that makes sense, that's logical. I want to see a budget that makes sense, where the costs are reasonable. I want to see that the organization that's proposing the program has the capacity to fulfill the requirements of the grant. And I want to see an application that really captures and speaks to what the solicitation is about. So I want to feel like you are developing this in response to this solicitation, that this is not, oh, we had this program 10 years ago, we just kind of want to keep it going, but that you're open to revitalizing the program or adjusting the program to speak directly to the needs of this specific solicitation. So it's a very narrow focus point. And that you have the capacity. And the way you demonstrate capacity is you attach the resumes of the folks who are going to be helping you do this work. And so I don't know that it's more or less about long-term tracking. I think that gets a lot into data management and performance measurement, and you really get into that as you become a grant recipient. So applications are really about, did you conduct a thorough needs assessment? Do you have the capacity, and is your language speaking plainly to the goals of the solicitation? So I hope that's helpful. Are providers from sanctuary states eligible? So I'd refer you back to the eligibility guidelines. We don't directly talk about sanctuary cities, but we do talk about eligibility guidelines. What was the logic model web link? Oh, as William mentioned earlier, there's a way you can download the slides. And after you download the slides, there is a slide that has a link to the logic model. And there's also a link to logic models and examples helping you build them out is found in the solicitation as well.
Thank you, Kathy. And also, I'd like to take a moment while you're on the subject just to mention to folks that, yes, if you're having any issues accessing those handouts, please contact the OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. We can assist if you're having any trouble downloading the files in the handouts pod there. And also, in addition to a couple of questions that's being asked in the chat that are coming in about the webinar, please note that it is being recorded. I know some people may have joined a little later, so they didn't hear the announcement, but we are recording this, and we are able to allow for you to get access to the recording of this webinar after we conclude today. So it will go over all of the questions that Kathy's currently addressing as well. So sorry about that, Kathy. Just wanted to mention that for a couple of folks who were asking in the chat there.
Oh, thanks, William. Thanks. Appreciate that. I know I'm going really quickly, so it's good that this is going to be recorded so you can go back if you missed anything. Will there be a planning period and a strategic plan required before implementation? No. This program doesn't have a strategic plan requirement, and we don't, although we don't explicitly say there's a planning period and there's an implementation period, it's assumed that, or I should say, we would welcome grantees who give time to plan before going into full implementation. Likewise, if you get offered the grant and you want to go straight into implementation, we would welcome that as well. So it's not, there's not a hard and fast rule to that. So we would welcome it on both sides of the coin, depending upon the grantee. How much detail do we need to include concerning who will collect the data and methods used for data analysis? So I would refer you back to the the solicitation, where it talks about data collection and performance measurement. It talks a lot about what to include and how much to include. In terms of your narrative and when you're demonstrating your needs assessment, you do want to include some data. You want to talk about the population in your city or in your county, what the numbers look like, what the kids look like, what the family looks like. And so some data is going to be important to capture. And if you want to talk a little bit about the methodology used for data analysis, that could be helpful too. So there's no way that could hurt you if you talked about it. You may get a reviewer who's a numbers person, and they're very data driven, and they want to see those numbers. And then you may get a reviewer who they just want to know, can you respond to the problem? So our panels are a mixed bag of folks in this field of study. So talking about data a lot can't hurt you. So I'll leave that up to your discretion. Our faith-based organizations allowed to apply. So I'll refer you back to the eligibility. The program doesn't specifically single out faith-based organizations. And so if you are a faith-based organization, I would just refer you back to the eligibility. We are a county agency serving county residents. If we receive this grant, will we be required to serve clients outside of our county? So you determine your demographic, so we don't do that for you. We're not prescriptive when it comes to this program solicitation. So when you develop your application, you're telling us, this is what the program looks like on the local level. This is who's impacted, and this is our targeted demographic. That may shift and change, so you might say that as an applicant, but once you become a grantee, the demographic may shift. You may not be able to get the numbers or the outcomes that you wanted when you selected and identified the demographic in your application. So that is very fluid, and it's going to be up to you. I wouldn't require you to change your demographic, but you may need to change it if you find that the problem has shifted or the area has shifted. So that's the demographic is fluid. Can you use a curriculum that is effective in real life but is not evidence-based? I would leave that up to you to decide. If you are a prison-based nonprofit, does the state or corrections agency have to be the primary applicant? I would leave that up to you to decide. They don't have to be. As long as you meet the eligibility criteria, you can apply to this program announcement. Do successful applicants have to demonstrate a focus on reentry or transitional services, or can the program focus on family engagement during incarceration? I think that's subjective. I think that it's going to depend on how the program looks like in your part of the world. If what you're seeing on the ground is we really need to focus on family engagement here, then you should develop a proposal that's going to focus on family engagement. If what you see looks like reentry and transitional services, then so you have to build your proposal around what you're seeing in your state, and that's going to be unique to everyone, I think. Is there required grantee travel for grantee meetings? So you want to set aside a few $1,000s just in case something might come up. So you will be required to attend financial management training, but that's offered online as well as in person. But there might be something that I might recommend you attend, or you might hear about something. So it's always good to set aside about $3,000 to $5,000 for any sort of training. There's no requirement at this time, but it's good to have that extra padding in your budget. Can you provide services to CIP whose parent might be incarcerated if a different facility than the proposal? Yes, I think if they're within your same demographic, that would be fine. Just make sure that when you're in your narrative, you talk about other partnerships with other facilities. So if in your application you say we are partnering with the state correctional agency on Street A, and then you become a grantee and you say, oh, we're partnering with the state agency on Street B and C. We're going to have a conversation about that. So If you think that you might be working with different facilities for various services and activities, just make sure you list them in the proposal. Does the grant support caregivers? Yes, absolutely. The grant supports caregivers. Can the grant be used for services of juvenile hall minors alone? Is the juvenile a parent? That's what I would ask. So if you want to build your grant around providing services to offenders, youth offenders, I would make sure that it traces back to this is a youth offender, but they are also a parent of a child. That's how that angle can work. Can you provide services to the youth even after the parent is released? Yes, yes. There's some there is an allowance for reentry services and transitional services there, and pre and post release services. As long as you can demonstrate that this is a parent who was incarcerated, and they're preparing for release, then that would be fine. But you do want to make sure that you're capturing the target demographic, which is parents who are incarcerated and their minor children. So that you may arrive at that in a variety of different ways, but when we're reading your application, that should be pivotal. How? Okay. So I'm skipping through some of these questions because there's just so many. I apologize. I hope I get the main ones. There is no advantage or disadvantage between a major metro area or a smaller city. You don't have to worry about that. I've never heard a reviewer cite that. They just want to know, even if you're a smaller city, if you're a rural area, it does not matter. They just want to know that you have the capacity to administer federal funds in an appropriate way and really improve outcomes for these kids. That's what matters. Meals are not allowable, and so generally, so that's the key word. Meals are generally not allowable. That will be on a case-by-case basis, and that's something you really want to focus on should you get awarded. I wouldn't spend a lot of time in the application about meals with activities because we can do a lot of budget negotiations and modifications should the award be made. Also, go back to the DOJ Financial Guide. The DOJ Financial Guide is really going to give you guys a lot of guidance as it relates to what's allowable, what's unallowable, how do I build my budget, what makes sense, things like that. We applied for our 501 in January, but have been working under our fiscal sponsor. We expect to receive our status in May. Should we file under our fiscal sponsor or not? I actually do not know the answer to that question. I would refer you to the DOJ Financial Guide and see if you can find an answer to your question there. If you can't find an answer in the Financial Guide, there's probably a number. They have a customer service helpline, and I would call them and ask them for the best guidance on that. Can a case manager assist in parent-child visits, or does OJJDP recommend engaging a child advocate guardian for this purpose? I think we would leave that up to you. We would leave that up to you to find the best way to address that in your application. I would always be looking for the best person for the child, and it might be a case manager, or it might be a child advocate or a guardian. There's not a hard and fast rule to that, but whatever you decide upon, whether you want to tackle it from the standpoint of a case manager or from a child advocate, just make sure that it's a substantiated claim and that it really strengthens your proposal. So no hard and fast rule for that one. We're not very prescriptive in that way, especially when it comes to the application aspect. Because, so say you want to do it from a case manager perspective and you really feel strongly about that, or advocate perspective and you feel strongly about that, and you put that in your proposal and you get awarded the grant. As we start planning and talking to you all and you prepare for full implementation of this program, if the case manager aspect doesn't work, you'll just change it. You just change it to an advocate. Or if the advocate aspect doesn't work, you'll just change it back to a case. So that's really fluid, and that can be changed over time. So it's going to really depend on what speaks best to you and your state or community. So we have like maybe, I'll read a few more and then we'll close out. If the minor child is in the juvenile justice system, would this be an issue? Oh, it's a really, really good question. I do not think that it would be an issue. That is my best guess. I do not think that that would be an issue. I'm assuming this is just one situation and it doesn't speak to your entire program. And so my answer is based on that assumption. Is there an advantage of locating a project in a qualified opportunity zone? Not that I'm aware of. Can funds be allocated for paternity testing, family unification? So that gets into, that's a really, really good question. That speaks to the activities that you're going to be providing. So you have these broad goals and objectives, and that question speaks to the activities that are going to support your overall goals and objectives. So in terms of the activities, can I utilize funds for parental testing? Sure. Yep. If that's a part of an activity that you want to do as it relates to your broad goals and your broad objectives, if that's just like one subset of your program, then you could do that. That will involve conversations about how much paternity testing are you doing, how much money are you spending toward this, but a lot of that happens should you become awarded. So if you want to put that in your budget as a line item in the application process, then that would be fine. Which version of the DOJ financial guide should be used? I think the most recent version is on the website. And I think it's 2017 or 18. Stipends are allowable. Yes. Is there a preference in this grant to focus on incarcerated mothers or fathers? Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for that question. So there's no preference, but we definitely, there is no preference. So if you would like to develop programming around incarcerated mothers and fathers, you're more than welcome to do so. Can I as an individual apply for this grant, or is it for organizations who want to expand their program? I would refer you back to the eligibility criteria, which you can find in the beginning of the solicitation. So let me see if I can get one more question in. If our program includes hiring staff of another agency, does that make the other agency a subrecipient or a subcontractor? So that depends on, so subrecipients and subcontractors, there's a ton of information about this in the DOJ financial guide. If you wanted to hire staff from another agency, my first question would be, is it a government agency or is it a nonprofit agency? And how it's let's follow the money. So who's paying them? Are they being paid out of the general operating funds? Are they doing a detail whereby they're going to literally leave their place of employment and work for your agency for the amount of time that they're dedicated to the grant? Or do they work for a nonprofit? If they work for a nonprofit, that's a contract. If they're not paid out of the general operating fund, but they're still being paid out of their organization's budget, then that's a contract. So the only people that should be listed under personnel are people who are being paid out of the general operating budget for your specific organization. Anyone else, you just have to put them under, I think there's a contractual category or a category for consultants, and you would put all of your subrecipients and subcontractors in that category. So thanks everyone for participating on the call today. Certainly appreciate your time, and best of luck as you prepare to submit your proposals for this program solicitation. Thank you so much. William, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, sure. Yeah, thank you, Kathy, and thank you to everyone who's joined us for today's webinar. I did have just a few brief announcements and reminders to folks to keep in mind before we adjourn. So please note that you may contact NTTAC through the website displayed on this slide. You can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for NTTAC's TTA listserv. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook at OJJDP TTA as well. You can also contact OJJDP via the help desk here as well. Contact information on this slide will allow for us to get you directly in contact with OJJDP. And do you have a TTA need? Please submit a request via the help desk on OJJDP's TTA 360 platform through the link displayed on this slide. As a reminder, this webinar will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the event transcript and supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. And also, as a final reminder, please take a few minutes to complete the feedback evaluation form. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.